Well, it is finally time to do a comparison between these two chassis. This is a 2021 Polaris Khaos 850 with a 155 by 2.75 track with the Quick Drive 2. This is a 2020 Summit Expert 850 with the 154 by 3-inch track, and it also has shot start. A little quick backstory. I have had 4 Polaris RMKs over the last 7 years. I've ridden this chassis. This is the first Skidoo I bought, and I've had it for 18 rides this season on the sled and about 600 miles. So I've spent ample seat time on both of these chassis to have a decent idea of their strengths and weaknesses. I'm going to try to make this as brief as possible so I don't waste anyone's time. There will be 3 main categories. First off, I'm going to talk about just factory features, things each manufacturer does well and not so well. Then I'll talk briefly about the power plant and just different engine characteristics. And then most importantly, I'm going to talk about just handling. That'll be the main focus of the comparison. And then at the end I'll recap with, what I think if I was to do it all over again, if I'd buy another Skidoo or if I'd try out another Polaris. I guess just to jump in with factory features and things I do and don't like, I'll start off with the Skidoo. I do like the suspension for a factory shock package. I think it's very good. I don't like the brakes on this. They feel extremely spongy to me, and I've bled the brakes trying to address it and see if I could improve it, and I think that's just the way the Skidoo brake is. I really do like the shot start. I've never had electric start before because of the weight, but for 2 pounds it is very nice. You get spoiled, you get used to it. The running boards evacuate snow very well, but they are pretty wide, so they hang up a little bit more than the narrow Polaris boards. But at the same time, on the flip side, you have more real estate when you're jumping back and forth on the sled. You have a bigger place to land, so that's kind of a toss-up. There's pros and cons to the running boards, but they do evacuate snow well. The seat is nice and compact for a factory seat. I like that. The short tunnel, it is nice to at least have that as an option. Not everybody benefits from it the same, but at least Skidoo makes that available. If you want it, you can get it from the factory, which is nice. Tmotion, I don't like it. The only thing the closest thing I could compare it to is if you've ever tried to catch a fish with your bare hands and it's like flopping all over the place and it's like, just hold still. And I'll leave it at that. I don't like the Tmotion. I locked it out on this sled. Definitely something I dislike. The scratchers on the sled are good. It's a tiny item, but they're better performance than the Polaris scratchers. You can back up and they don't break, which is handy, especially if you have newer riders hopping on your sled. Those are the main things I do and don't like from the factory on this. Oh, another thing, so the clutching. I like that you can adjust the clutch without switching weights or anything like that. You can adjust your RPM pretty easy with those quick clickers. It's pretty handy. We all ride in different snow conditions and terrain and elevation, so it's nice to be able to adjust that without screwing with weights. One thing I forgot to mention about the Skidoo that I dislike is the steering post not being vertical. So it's tilted back, which makes it extremely difficult to jump between like this and an Arctic Cat or this and a Polaris, because they both have, Arctic Cat and Polaris both have a vertical steering post. And it seems like a small deal, but man, jumping back and forth, it is really hard to adjust. And also, I don't see any benefits to having, slanted back steering post. Your handlebars do all sorts of weird things. They're not on a straight plane when you turn, so I dislike that. With the Polaris, I do like, so the factory shocks on this, those velocity shocks on the Khaos, I think are very good as well for a factory shock. They're equally as good, if not better, than the factory shocks on the Skidoo. I also really like the positive brake feel on the Polaris as well. I like that it has a vertical steering post. I do not like that it doesn't have a tether from the factory. I think that should just be a no-brainer. That should be a factory item on any mountain sled, and it is on the other manufacturers, but not on Polaris. I do like the running boards. They're narrower, so it's kind of the opposite of the Skidoo boards. These are narrower, so they don't hang up like much at all, but it's also a smaller target to hit when jumping back and forth. But they evacuate snow equally as well as the Skidoo boards. Polaris also does not have a short tunnel factory, so I wish it did. I don't know why Polaris hasn't jumped on the bandwagon with that, but they haven't. I also really like that it has belt drive from the factory. It's been in production for years and it's tried and true. It's a very reliable system. It works super well. I love belt drive. I don't know why the other manufacturers have not picked up on that one yet. So next for power plant. So I'm not going to spend much time on this because I know people get all fired up and debate what motor is better and whatnot. But the characteristics of the Polaris, so it doesn't have as much torque, and this is showed on a dynograph as well. You can see the torque curve comes on later. So once they run out, they're very similar power, you know, jumping back and forth between the sleds. It's not noticeable one over the other, but the way the power comes on is quite a bit different. You know, this has to rev up before the power comes on, whereas this sounds like it's just kind of doggy, you know, it doesn't rev as quick, but the power is there quicker because the torque comes on just at a lower RPM. That's probably about all I'll say about the power because I know people like to debate that one. So for handling characteristics, I'll go over what this does well. The Skidoo chassis climbs quite well. That I would say is a strength of it. Also, it's very poppy, so you get front end lift a little bit quicker. Part of that's the 3-inch track, but it just picks the skis up quicker if you have to flip around in a tight situation. When it comes to side hilling, man, the steeper it gets, the larger the difference is between the two machines. If you're side hilling, you know, up at an angle, it side hills well. If you're side hilling down at a pretty steep angle and descending, it does pretty well. But if you want to pick across the slope sideways and traverse up and down without dropping a ski, you know, just kind of elevator down, come back up and back down, it is nearly impossible on a steep slope. It really, really fights you. You almost have to wheelie the machine up and then set the front end. And I've ridden, you know, this is a 154, but I've also ridden 165s, 175s, and it's similar, you know. I mean, it's better on the longer track, but it's still, they fight you when you're just trying to go straight sideways. And they side hill, like I say, you know, up at an angle if you're climbing, they side hill pretty well. But it is very hard on this machine. It really wears you out to be side hilling straight across the slope as it gets steeper, and to be able to drop your front end down and stay on one ski and then come back up. It's a handful to do that on. The Polaris can traverse on a steep side hill much better. And it's kind of a little bit disappointing in like magazines, or you hear from sponsored riders that talk about how well these things side hill. And I'm not trying to pick on Skidoo. I like BRP as a brand, and there are things this machine does well. But man, you just get on a steep slope and it is extremely evident they do not excel there at all. You know, I think the gap just gets bigger and bigger the steeper the slope is between the Polaris and the Skidoo chassis. It bucks a lot more, so like it will want to high side you much more than the Polaris chassis does. I think part of that, there's so much track pressure on the Skidoo. So, you know, if you're on your track and it bucks, when you counter steer, your skis aren't even really touching the snow hardly. And so by the time your skis do touch the snow, you're already headed down the hill into a tree or whatever is below you. Whereas the Polaris, when you get bucked, if you counter steer, you have ski pressure because this machine just naturally has more ski pressure. And so when you counter steer, normally you can recover, and it just feels much more in control on a side hill. I think this is a little bit, or this is better at doing pirouettes, you know, from the factory. And part of that, you know, just has a lot more track pressure. So this still is surprisingly playful, especially compared to like, you know, a long track RMK or even just a normal RMK. This still is very playful, and then also can, you know, side hill if you have to get down in the trees. Yeah, like I say, this does climb well. I would say that's probably one of its strong points. It depends on the terrain you ride, really, you know, and I'm not bashing on the Skidoo intentionally. I'm just saying the terrain that I like to ride, the steeper tree stuff, and, you know, tighter, and, you know, kind of, I guess we don't have much for open terrain. So, you know, if you were to ride the open terrain, or you ride BC or something like that, you know, there would be strengths to, you know, these things climb very well, and if you're just going up and down and just up at an angle, I don't think there, you know, the drawbacks would not be as evident. Same thing with the Tmotion as well. Probably wouldn't make that big of a difference if you're just climbing and descending. But where we live, you know, in the terrain we ride in, the Polaris chassis is just a lot more forgiving as you get into the steep trees. And this is a short track, and so you can, you know, if you go to a long track on either machine, it'll be better, but this is a pretty good mix of still being able to side hill, but at the same time you can still do bow ties and pirouettes and, you know, kind of screw around and just have a hooligan machine as well. Whereas I feel like the Skidoo is much more focused on getting front end lift, which is super fun, but if you don't want to die when you're in steep stuff, it's not so much fun. It just, you know, my arms are much more tired at the end of the day riding this than, you know, jumping on the Polaris chassis if we're in the trees. If you're in the open and the snow is fluffy, you know, it doesn't wear you out as much. But even an old phaser handles good when the snow is fluffy, so it's kind of it's kind of evident, you know, as the snow gets set up and you're crossing tracks and it gets steeper. And I don't say that to make Skidoo people mad. That is just something that I feel like hasn't been addressed because, you know, people who are sponsored don't want to say anything bad about the machine. Whereas, you know, we paid for it with our own money. I have no ties to Polaris or Skidoo, and so, you know, I'm not scared to say what it doesn't do well. I think the Polaris chassis, you know, just the rear skid, the way that it handles not washing out is also a huge difference as well. You know, this wants to kick out a lot more, which once again will high side you and, you know, put you down the hill. So, you know, all that to not to pick on Skidoo people. You know, I have a Skidoo, but they, you know, they kind of struggle, or not kind of, they absolutely struggle when it gets steep. So I guess if I was to do it all over again and I was, you know, what's the $1 million question, or I guess the $15,000 question in this situation, would I buy another Skidoo, or would I try out, you know, another Polaris chassis? And I think the easiest way to answer that would be just to show you. So, one second. Well, I feel like for me, 600 miles on that sled was enough to find out that it doesn't fit my riding style. I just went and bought this earlier this week, and it just fits what I like a lot better. Not to say that the Skidoo doesn't have, you know, its place. It definitely does. Just in our terrain, I live in Northwest Montana, we don't have open, rolly, hilly stuff. It's just all tree riding for the most part. So for me, that, you know, the Khaos is just a much better fit for that because it's kind of the best of both worlds. You can side hill and not be terrified when it gets steep, you know, and then you can also still flip around and have fun playing, which is what the, you know, the short track Skidoo excels at. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. You know, I find myself subconsciously on the Skidoo, I just find myself taking the easier line because it's like I don't even want to try that because I know it's going to buck me, whereas like on the Polaris, you know, you feel a lot more comfortable. For me, I feel a lot more confident going into somewhere and knowing that, like, okay, if it starts to buck or starts to get steep, I'm not going to wheelie up and, you know, total my sled. I can actually correct it and get it set and still be in control of the snowmobile. So for me, I'm not trying to ruffle the feathers of Skidoo riders out there because, you know, depending on where you live and your riding style, you know, this could still be a very good fit. But for me, you know, this sled is for sale. I bought the Polaris and I just think it fits my needs much better. So hopefully that helps you guys. Not trying to offend people, but just want to call it how it is, you know. Obviously I spent a lot of money on this, so I would like to fall in love with it and really like all of its attributes, but I don't. And so I'm not scared to send it down the road and ride the Polaris for the rest of the season.